The Revolution at its breaking point by late 1776, the American Revolution was in serious danger of collapse. After a disastrous series of defeats in New York, Washington's Continental Army had been reduced to less than 5,000 men. His forces were poorly supplied, exhausted, and battered by hunger and disease. Desertions were common, and enlistments were set to expire at the end of the year. If Washington didn't act soon, the rebellion could die before 1777 even began. Despite the bleak outlook, Washington saw an opportunity. Instead of waiting for the British to crush him, he would go on the offensive. His plan? A bold nighttime crossing of the Delaware River to strike at the Hessian garrison in Trenton. On December 26, 1776, Washington's gamble paid off spectacularly. The Battle of Trenton was an overwhelming American victory. The Hessians were caught completely off guard. 900 captured, their commander killed. But while Trenton was a huge morale booster, it wasn't enough. Washington needed a second strike. One that would prove that Trenton wasn't just a lucky break, but a sign that the Continental Army was still a force to be reckoned with. And so, the plan for Princeton was born. Cornwallis moves to crush Washington after Trenton. The British immediately responded. General Charles Cornwallis, the brilliant but overconfident British commander, rushed 8,000 troops south toward Trenton. By January 2, 1777, Cornwallis had reached the outskirts of Trenton, where Washington had dug in along the Assunpink Creek. The British launched 3 assaults but were repulsed each time. Frustrated but convinced that Washington was cornered, Cornwallis decided to wait until morning to deliver the finishing blow. This was his first mistake. As his officers urged him to attack before nightfall, Cornwallis famously replied, "The fox is in the trap. We'll bag him in the morning." But Washington had other plans. The Great Escape. Washington's midnight march. Washington knew his army would not survive another battle at Trenton. So instead of waiting for Cornwallis to strike, he devised an audacious plan. A night march to outflank the British and strike Princeton instead. At midnight, Washington ordered his men to leave their campfires burning while a handful of soldiers noisily dug entrenchments and made sounds of movement, tricking the British into thinking the army was still in position. Meanwhile, the real army quietly slipped away, marching 18 miles over frozen, rutted roads in the dead of night. The men were exhausted, hungry, and freezing, but they pressed on, driven by their commander's vision. By dawn on January 3rd, they reached the outskirts of Princeton. The battle begins. Hugh Mercer's fateful clash as Washington's main force approached Princeton. General Hugh Mercer led a 350-man vanguard towards Stony Brook Bridge, hoping to seize it before the British could react. But British Lieutenant Colonel Charles Mawhood was already on the move. Mawhood was marching 276 British regulars north toward Trenton to reinforce Cornwallis, completely unaware that Washington was behind him. Mercer's and Mawhood's forces suddenly collided. A ferocious close-quarters battle erupted, with muskets firing at point-blank range and bayonets flashing in the early morning light. The British counterattacked viciously, forcing the outnumbered Americans back. Mercer fought like a lion, refusing to surrender even as his troops broke under the relentless bayonet charge. He was stabbed multiple times and left for dead on the battlefield. The Americans were on the verge of total collapse. Washington's heroic intervention just as Mercer's men were falling apart. Washington arrived with reinforcements. Seeing his troops in disarray, he did something almost unthinkable for a general. He rode directly into the line of fire. On horseback, in full view of both armies, Washington galloped forward. With bullets whizzing past him, he turned to his men and shouted for them to stand firm. His presence alone rallied the troops, and under his command, they launched a furious counterattack. Mawhood, recognizing the danger, attempted to rally his troops, but the Americans surged forward with renewed energy. The British broke and began retreating toward Princeton. The last stand at Nassau Hall as Mawhood's remaining troops fled toward the College of New Jersey, now Princeton University. About 200 British soldiers barricaded themselves inside Nassau Hall, the grand central building of the campus. The Americans surrounded the building and opened fire. According to legend, a cannonball smashed through the walls of Nassau Hall, decapitating a portrait of King George III, a symbolic blow to British rule. Soon, the British inside surrendered. The Battle of Princeton was over. Aftermath. A revolution saved. The victory at Princeton was far more than just another battlefield win. It was a psychological and strategic turning point. Immediate impact. The British abandoned most of New Jersey, retreating to New York. Washington's army survived the winter instead of being crushed. Hundreds of new recruits joined the Continental Army. Long-term impact. The British never fully recovered from the defeat. France and Spain took notice, making it easier for the Americans to win foreign support. Washington's reputation grew immensely. His ability to outmaneuver a larger army proved he was a military genius. By winter 1777, the American Revolution was no longer a lost cause. Thanks to Washington's daring gamble, the dream of independence lived on. Legacy of the Battle of Princeton. The Battle of Princeton was one of George Washington's greatest victories. It cemented his reputation as a brilliant commander, someone who could outfight and outthink the mighty British Empire. Today, you can visit the battlefield in Princeton, New Jersey, and walk the same paths where Washington's troops fought. Nassau Hall still stands, a reminder of the day when the Revolution was reborn. The old fox escapes again the night before Princeton. Cornwallis thought he had Washington trapped. By dawn, Washington had outmaneuvered him, crushed a British garrison, and saved the Revolution. It was one of the most brilliant moves of the war, a testament to Washington's genius, courage, and unbreakable spirit. "The fox is in the trap," Cornwallis had said. But when he woke up the next morning, Washington was long gone, leaving behind another battlefield covered in British dead.